Hi, Denise. How are you doing?
Doing well, Lisa. How are you?
Good. It's been a long time. I miss you.
I know, but welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be back in the saddle again. Eric, I want to say I love you and happy kind of belated birthday.
Eric he's sitting there kind of like he's joking, like he's like, well, belated, but he knows that you were definitely with him on his birthday because he says you were celebrating, but he says, thank you. He's kind of trying to be diplomatic about how he says it, but, and then he's just like, oh, forget all that effing shit he's saying, and he said, but now he says let's get down to today, and he also wants to say he loves you very much. He says that's the utmost thing. He always wants you to know how much he loves you, and the
I
way he
know.
keeps going like that.
Yeah, I know. And I love you too. Wish you were here, but I'll take anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, those birthdays are hard. But anyway,
Ooh,
let's just go on, plow
okay.
through. I understand that things like separation is an illusion, scarcity is an illusion. Why are so many people battling, scarcity? They want abundance of some sort, of love, of a stable career, of health, of material possessions, whatever, abundance. But some people just have such a hard time materializing that. So, can you tell us about, talk a little bit about the illusion of scarcity and the reality that there is abundance?
He says, well, the scarcity, he's not talking about about other countries where there's scarcity, like shortage of water and
Yeah.
food. He says that's different compared to what he's talking about, like where people, like here in the United States or other countries where there's abundance, but people seem to not have it. um, he said some of it is, and he's showing me also to some of the homeless people, that's part of their contract, is to experience lack of scarcity, and that's part of it. He said some of them, he says, were overflowing with wealth, and they decided to experience the other side of it. And
Hmm. You mean in the same life or in a past life?
different life.
Oh, okay.
Different life. He says, but then he says there's people here that have an abundance of money, he's showing me, but they still experience the same illusion of scarcity. It's like they don't ever feel like they have that fear of not having enough.
Hmm.
They don't have, he's saying, what I like to say is financial freedom. They don't have that. But he says the scarcity, he's saying, for people that are always trying to get it, waiting, like they get that lump, he's saying, like their income tax check or something, and then something major comes up, a car breaks
Oh, I
down or something.
know.
And he says, not all of it, he says, but a lot of it is how people think about money. Um, he's given me the feeling like this was talked about before, and about making friends with money, writing a love letter to money,
Hmm.
because he says money is energy. He's saying that we look at it as we don't have enough. We're looking at it as, even though we're saying abundance is flowing freely to me, he's making a joke about how we say it, but at the same time, our thought is we don't believe that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And Eric says, like, start showing appreciation for everything you get. Like, this feels really good tying my shoes.
Hmm.
This feels so nice putting on my pair of jeans, instead of saying, God, I only got one pair of jeans.
Yeah.
Start changing your words, your thoughts. He said it's not so much as it's your thought. He says it's your vibration. Um, he says, that what you vibrate out, the universe gives you that back. So um, he's also saying, there's a lot of fear behind scarcity. There's a lot of fear.
Why? Yeah.
He's saying it's the way we were brought up. He say, and it goes. It keeps. He says it's not just. He goes. It's not just your parents, and it's not their parents. He says, but there is fear driven into us. You know, like the economy's going to collapse, and he says, you know, so he says a lot of that fear came from. Also, too, is he's showing me like World War II, he's telling me. When the Depression hit, you know, when
right.
before,
that was between World
yeah,
War I and II.
Yes, right before. And then he is showing me how we got into fear with that after that. And then he says that's one of the reasons why we create things, so that we well, I don't want to talk about it. But we create the fear, he's saying, because we're so afraid things are going to happen, so we keep repeating history.
Well, is it related to just our survival instincts as a primitive, on a primitive level, as an animal? Oh, I need enough to eat to survive and to reproduce and all that kind of stuff. Is it related to that at all?
Erik says way back when, people knew there was always going to be enough. They didn't have to go buy a freezer full of steaks or a refrigerator full of produce and that, because they knew what they needed to do for breakfast time or lunchtime. And he's telling me that people didn't eat gross amounts of food like we do here in the States.
Yeah.
And he says, but it all comes from fear. And he says, and also there's greed, you know, because they
which is based on fear, of course.
Yes.
Of not having enough. Yeah.
But he's showing me how greed and fear blend together. And that's but he's saying and that's part of what's going on right now around the world is there's such a fear going around about money, and people are wondering, should they invest in this, should they do this, or should they do that with their money? And it's that fear, so everybody's got the money by its neck, and then the money can't flow.
That doesn't sound like a love letter to money, but yeah, you know, I think things have gotten so much more complex. There's so many things that you could possibly do with money, so many different investment avenues, so much more to buy. There's more competition. There's more of a bigger population of people to compete with for resources, even though they're supposed to be abundant. So maybe speak to that.
He's saying that he's saying that we got away from what's really going on, and so we automatically think everything is about money. He said some of your happiest people are living very minimal, and they're very happy. And it's just that he says we, for some reason, he's showing me how we just keep thinking bigger is better. And he says it also has to do with we're getting away from, he says we really have gotten away from about finding all of that stuff within, because when you're very content within, then that flows out to the rest of your space, the energy, the world, whatever you want to call it. And then there's not really room for lack. You may not have the brand new car or the brand new house, but there is plenty of income to supply you with a roof over your head and food and your needs.
Well, you know, I remember, Annika, my youngest, went to Peru to volunteer in their clinics, and she was just so struck by how happy the people were that had so little. Most of them didn't have shoes, but their life was simple, and maybe they had so much love, that's all they needed. I mean, money and desire and greed and all that kind of sometimes pushes out love. So, and I saw that in my own practice too. Some of the happiest people were the ones that had the least. And some of the most depressed and angry people were the ones that were wealthy. Not all, but
Right. Well, he's saying in that aspect, like with the people in Peru, he said he's saying those people were using their creativity to create. They were their imagination to create things in their life, to have fun and stuff. He says, and it's just an illusion of a lack, and it's an illusion to have an abundance. Like it's either way you can shift that. Because he says really none of this stuff is real.
Yeah.
It's just our perception of it. And he keeps playing this song in my head by a current singer, the Royals, I think, or something. Or there's a song about the Royals, about he's saying they sing a song about not having, they just make use out of what they have around the place, like a tin can for a telephone or something like that, and he's but he's just saying we just got away from, he says we're not using our creativity. Yeah. And we keep thinking we have to find everything on the outside. But he also said the scarcity, he says there's people that have had a lot of money, or they had a decent job and they lost it. And it's because some of it, he says it's not one answer for everyone, but some of it is because that person needed to get humble, or that person needed to work on other things within their life, and the money kept them from going there. So the universe says, this is what you need to work on. And when he's saying that, he's showing me there's some great philosophers and mediums that had a lot and then had it all taken away so that they could work on and become what they intended to come here to be. Because he says money's a big distractor, because we think money can buy everything, and he says, and there's that old saying, money can't buy you health.
Yeah, or love.
Yeah, he said that. Well, he says some people think it buys them love.
Yeah, well, hooker on the corner, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I think money crowds out, and distracts our attention away from figuring ourselves out, becoming our authentic self, trying to appreciate the value of love and health and so many things. So in one session, Erik, you said that manifestation of abundance, or reality overall, can be like on a cellular level. Like you have a thought of something you want to manifest, and the cells change their vibration and emit a vibration that helps create that reality. Is that true?
He says that's absolutely true. And he's showing me how, when you're doing that, how the cells, and he's showing me like the cells are living entities within us, so he's showing me how it just starts filtering down, and it's almost like, okay, now you're changing that thought, and then the cells start just trickling down happy, and then you start feeling better. He says there is some truth to when they say go exercise, because it can help change your perspective about things.
Okay. Yeah. And, I know a lot of people who have thought, oh my God, I'm going to get colon cancer. And, 20 years later, they do. One particular person I know. Yeah, I guess you can, with your thoughts, change yourself on a cellular level to manifest certain health issues, for example.
Erik said absolutely. He said, but we are so clueless, so unaware of that, he's saying, because he says we like to hold other people responsible for that stuff.
Yeah. It's like we're looking to the outside for entertain me, make me happy, instead of finding it within. And so what do you think was the trigger? What changed from us being a society where we knew we had enough to a society where we are afraid we won't? And we have a lot of fear and greed wrapped up around scarcity and abundance.
Well, he's saying that's always, he shows me how, not in the very beginning of time, he's showing me like way back, he's saying that was okay. But it's when we started, I feel like what he means, like when we started inventing things, like something that will start a fire, when we started inventing things, then he says, and then with population got bigger, and then we feel like we had to control. Somebody had to be the boss. Somebody had to organize. And he's showing me how, like when people came over to this country, the Europeans came over to this country, how they had to organize everything. Somebody had to be the boss, and somebody had to be the co-boss, and of everything. And then that didn't work, so then they had to have 2 bosses and 3 bosses. He's just showing me, and he's saying, and that's why things started coming around to where then we had to have a president, because we needed somebody to run everything. And then he's showing me how, and from that, and it's not just because we have a president, it has nothing to do with political, it's just our humanness thinking that somebody's got to control it, because we were afraid people would take it. And he's even showing me that we knew we were taking something from the Native American Indians, and there was a fear, so they had to hoard, is what Erik is showing me. That he had to hoard. We had to hoard this stuff. And so then we had to start putting taxes on things, he's saying. And then, and then people started seeing how they had power in that.
Yeah.
And then it just, and it just keeps going and going and going. And he's showing me how over in Australia, there's the Aborigines, before they were taking away things from them. But back in the beginning, how though they lived off the land, they didn't carry material things.
Yeah.
He's showing me they didn't care, because they always knew whatever they needed, from food to sleep to water to clothes, whatever, it would always be there. And he says, and those people didn't get sick either.
Wow, that's interesting, because fear and greed, that can cause a lot of illness, because you got anger involved. Depression can, rear its ugly head when you feel like you don't have what you want. So invention. So then people felt like, well, I invented something. I need to protect it. I need to gain from it. And so the slippery slope happens.
Yeah, Erik says we just don't like to share.
Why?
Because he says we're afraid we're not going to have enough. He goes, it all comes back to fear. He said, if everybody would share, then know as they're sharing, there will be more coming. But we're so afraid.
Yeah.
I can't give you $100, because what if I don't get it back? What if,
So there should be, for abundance, a flow, right? A circular flow. Give, get, like a beautiful flow of energy. Is that what you're saying?
He said,
is that behind the abundance or not?
He said yes, but you got to be. He says that, but that also has the same thing about having respect for money, because you can't just sit there and just give it away and not care what you're doing with it. You have to have. There's a respect that you have to have with it, because Erik says that there is something to it about how you keep your money in your wallet. He says people that just stuff money in their pants or their purse or their wallet and it's all crinkled. He says, you know, he's not saying that if you keep it all neat all the time, you're going to get rich, but it's just shows you, it just, he says it's something to bring your attention to it on how you're caring, how you feel about money.
That's interesting. When I was a little girl, you know, I took my allowance and I made sure that I converted it to $1 bills. And I was the only one of the siblings that really, you know, saved my money. And I would iron it to make it nice and straight and stack it. And I thought it was so beautiful. And then we went to stay at my grandmother's in Baytown, Texas. And there was this big old slip and slide, those giant slides that you go on burlap sacks, so you slide down. Well, my siblings talked me out of all the money so they can go up on the slide. So easy come, easy go. All right, so let's talk more about the energy and the energy flow of money.
Erik says, he's telling me, he said, he's saying that for the people that have some income, you know, he's not talking about the people that don't have money to pay their light bill or don't have money to pay their rent. But he's talking about people that have money to accommodate all those things. And he's saying that you shouldn't spend any of your money until you can spend it without resistance.
Oh, okay.
And he says, and he's saying, and when you're spending the money, he says, you know, like really, like treat it like a friend. Like, I hope you enjoy this, you know, or when he says, he's telling me like, you're telling your friend you hope you enjoy this cup of coffee, but he means like, thank you for this, you know, thank you for allowing me to be able to do this. He says if there's resistance there, like, oh, I know I shouldn't be buying this, there's too much money, he says, then don't do it.
Yeah.
He says, because then you've put that energy into action, and then the universe hears that and gives you back that. Exactly. He said, so don't spend anything until you can get to a place where it's, I feel like he's like where it's coming from your heart, you know, where you're like okay with it. And he says, if somebody asks you for $5 and you really like, I really don't want to give it to them, he says, then don't give it to them. Okay. Make sure whatever you're doing, it comes from your heart. But he's also saying too, though, he's saying ask your effing self, why are you being so stingy? Like, what's got you in that space?
Yeah. And what is behind that? Why are some people so stingy? I guess it's got to be about
fear. Or
maybe they want to punish people. I don't know.
Or they feel like, I had to work hard for my money, you work hard for it. Or you spend your money at the movies and now you want this. Or he says there's a lot of judging involved.
Oh, yeah.
But he says, but that all comes back to fear.
Yeah.
And he's saying, and you know, there's quite a few people, he says, within channeling Erik, he's addressing this, he says, is that they grew up poor.
Yeah.
And so now that they're adults and they're working, they still carry that from their childhood, that they grew up poor, and, you know, and they just, or a lack of, or not enough of, or their sibling would always steal their stuff or something. And so now they're like, oh no, and they're hanging on to it real tight. And
yeah, or sometimes they've been people who had a decent living, but then lost their job, lost everything, and that's why they went on the road to seek spiritual answers, and then they stumble upon channeling Erik. So
yes,
yeah.
And Erik says that he says it's kind of he says it's a fine line he's showing me to being okay with not having money and having money.
Yeah.
It's a fine line he's showing me how, because you can be okay with not having a lot of money, but at the same time knowing that there's always enough.
Yeah.
And there's okay with having a lot of money and having nice things and not feeling guilty about it, because he says some people feel guilty because there's people that don't have it. He says, you know, you created this, so that's why you have this. And I feel like when he's saying this, he's talking to me, you know, not that I have a lot of money, I'm not saying that, but just where I came from and where I am. But he's saying that the universe wants you to have all the things that you vibrate out.
Yeah.
And if that's a mansion or driving a Rolls or driving a 10-year-old car or whatever it is. And he says, you know, he says it's all vibration. You got to just be okay with it.
And some people have spiritual contracts to have to be impoverished too. So you can't necessarily save them from their contracts.
No, you can't. And Erik says that some people in their contracts that have chose that, he says they still can, in a sense, what he's showing me, they can cut that cord, cut that contract, or have it to where they're not having to stand on the street corner and beg for money their whole life. He says, but some of that is their contract. It's to teach them humility.
Yeah.
Because they chose to have that in this life. Not that there's karma, but maybe they were, I don't know, Erik has shown me like a butthead before. And so now they want to experience the other side of that, you know. And he says it's not karma. He's real clear about wanting me to say that. But it's just they wanted to see that other side, to see what it feels like. And he says, and then there's some people that choose to live on the street because of the choices that they made.
Mm.
And he says, don't feel sorry for them.
Yeah. It's a contract.
And and he says, but then that also gets into another whole level too, because there are people on the streets that have mental illness.
Yeah.
And that's where he's saying it brings up so much fear for us because we're afraid to give somebody $1 on the street, or we're afraid to give them $10 because we're like, but that's my money.
Or will they buy, alcohol with it, or
Erik says we shouldn't judge what they're buying with it.
Yeah, just give it if it feels right. That's what he said.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
There's some people that just can't hold on to money. For example, people who win the lotto, and then a few years later they're broke as can be, or some of these country singers and celebrities, they just lose everything. Why are there some people who just can't have abundance? They can't hold on to it.
Well, Erik says he says the lottery winners, people that can't hang on to it, is because they have no respect for money.
Mm.
And they have, he's telling me it's really as simple as this, but he's telling me about people that have real short fingernails like me, go get the real long fingernails, and then they can't type, they can't pull the windows down, or they can't put their makeup on because they went from short to long. And he says, and it's the same way with the lottery winners. They went from no money in their wallet to an abundance of money. And he says, when you've only had $10 in your bank at the end of each week, and then all of a sudden you have some millions, that's an endless cash flow to them. And they don't realize it, and they have then he showed me on some level they just stopped thinking about whatever they were working on or thinking about or what was making them do things different. And then they're like, okay, so money changes the course, and so they can ignore everything else. And what they don't realize is there's not a continuous flow of the money, because it's their mentality about the money. They have no respect. And he says, and some of them, he said a lot of, he's saying there are some that are very disrespectful.
What does that look like? Disrespect for money? I don't understand.
Well, he says it's like some is how they treat people with it, how they buy stuff with it, and they'll buy stuff and not think about it, and then later it's like, oh, I didn't like that, and then they throw it away because they got several million in the bank and they don't care about what they have, and they just throw it away. But people will come ask them for money, and then they get real closed off and no, we can't, and it's because they get that fear coming in of not having enough. But he says there are some people that have given away money and gave away too much, and then they ended up with nothing. But he says they're lacking in education and finance.
Oh, that's true.
On how to do and how to handle the money. But he says now with the country singers or the rock singers or any kind of genre of music that you're in, he says these people have worked so hard to get to where they are, to where they were eating, he's showing me like Roman noodle soup 3 times a day if they were lucky, to having thousands start coming in, and then it just started increasing. And some of these people are not financial savvy people, so they have managers and everything taking care of everything, and they're not checking their own bank account, and they're not checking to see how much money is going out the door as opposed to he's saying the sales and everything coming in. And then they think that whatever they're doing is endless, but they don't have a plan to keep it going.
Well, they trust people who are supposedly financially savvy that could be corrupt and taking advantage of them. So,
and a lot happens, and he says, but then a lot, there's drugs and alcohol.
Oh yeah, that costs a lot of money. Yeah, there's something else I was going to say. Oh yeah, kind of reminds me of a family member that loves fishing. I won't mention the person's name. And oh my God, he caught so many beautiful red snapper out offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, and had it in a cooler on ice. Well, he just brought it home, didn't do anything about it. Days and days went by, and opened up that cooler, and it was full of maggots, totally destroying the life of these beautiful creatures that were meant to be treasured and whatever. It shows he had no respect for abundance, for the lives of those beautiful fish, and he wasted it. And guess what? After that, he didn't catch anything for months and months and months. So,
and Erik says that's a good example of it too. That's a real good example. He says because on so many levels there was a lot of disrespect. A disrespect for the ability to be able to get all of that, and to be able to have the transportation to get out there and really enjoy that, and also disrespect for the animal itself.
I know. That's terrible. All right. Well, does the media have anything to do with this? Because, we get all this, limited supply only. If you're anybody, then you need this and you needed that and you need this. Do you think the media changed us to becoming more fearful of scarcity or not?
Erik says, oh yeah. He says those commercials on TV, those billboard signs, he says oh yeah. He says they know exactly what kind of music to play to get your attention, from adults to teens to toddlers to even babies. They know what to get their attention. And he says it's like they go from uh, let's get the littlest thing because that's the newest thing, and then everybody gets hooked on getting the little thing, and then when that's going on for a few years, then they start going back to let's get the bigger thing, and the bigger, and then so they keep increasing it. And he's showing me how like we do that with plates of food. You get 5 entrees for $5.99, and people start eating all of that. And he says there's something to that. It's to get us going into thinking, and
wow.
and instead of, he says, if we would stop buying those 5-course meals that are $4.99 or $5.99 and just start doing what we know what's good for us, then all of that stuff would fall apart.
Yeah, because it's all mission creep, man. It's like all you can eat buffets. Oh my gosh. I've seen people pull away from those with plate full of stuff.
I can't stand to eat at those places.
Oh no, they do, yeah. All right, so let's talk about the other countries that do have real scarcity. There's not much arable land. There's not much water. Some of the countries in Africa, for example. What's going on there?
Erik says that he wants to address Africa with the
in India, some parts of Mexico. So many. Venezuela right now. Okay, but go ahead.
Yeah, he said Venezuela is like pretty rough right now.
Yeah,
real rough. I don't know what's going on there, but he says it's real rough. But he's saying he says because it all will be for what the answers he gives will really cover for them others. He says,
okay.
The scarcity part though, where there's not enough food. He's saying not enough food, that's government crap.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, what is the government doing to make that happen, and why?
A lot of it's control, he's saying. That's sad. A lot of it's control. He shows me they're like so detached from themselves that they only care about their own stomachs.
Yeah.
And that they could put an end to it. And he's showing me Russia could put an end to it, because he says Russia has a real bad food shortage.
Oh.
And parts of it. And he says they could put an end to it. Yeah. But their ego is such a big player in that.
Yeah.
But he's saying with the food in that, it could happen. And he's showing me though in Africa, where they still live pretty primitive in that, he says it's government, but he says it's also about education. And he says, it's not, he says, and then he says people here get so, I'm going to use his words, they get so fucking mad about sending money to other countries and helping them out. And he says, but we're all the same people. Yeah. We're the same family, he's saying. And people say, we need to help our own, but he's real riled up on this one. And he says, but they are our responsibility. They're our sisters and they're our brothers. He says, whether we like it or not, we're all connected.
Yeah, of course.
Whether we want to be or not. But he says that there are organizations that are helping with getting these people. He's showing me fresh water and educating them about how to grow their own crops that are native to their place.
And birth control, because, some of them just have more kids than they can afford to feed.
And he says it all has to do with education. And he says the government, though, could come in and help with that and open up the gates to allow people to come in and stuff. But it's he says it's a male dominant thing. And he's not trash talking men.
Yeah, of
But
course
he's
not.
just saying it's a male dominant thing in most of those areas. And they don't care if those women have a bunch of babies.
Mm.
And because they're not supporting them.
Yeah. But
They don't care.
it seems like it would behoove them to educate and make their people more successful, well-fed, healthier, more prosperous, because then they will be income producers. And basically tax revenues would come into the government. But you can't get squeeze blood out of a turnip if somebody is malnourished, can't even feed their children, etc. It just doesn't make any sense for the government, the oligarchs or whatever, to have that state of mind. I don't know. Okay, so if you have a person that, all right, I got $100 every year that I want to donate. Do I donate it to the poor in my own country or another country? How do they make that decision? Yes, we're all brothers and sisters, but there's only so much money each of us has.
Erik says yes, and he says, he says definitely go with the organization that you feel compassionate to, whether it's across the street from you
Or
or
across the ocean, yeah.
right. He says, but he says what happens is when you consistently do that give, whether it be across the street or like you said, across the ocean, you're giving from your heart.
Yeah.
And you're getting into that collective consciousness of
Mm-hmm.
people giving from their heart and helping. And if you think that expansion doesn't go out, it does. He's showing me the vibration is just amazing. So give $100 every year to an organization. You can give it to the animal shelter or
whatever
to,
your heart tells you to do.
yeah, whatever it is, he says you're in that collective consciousness and you're helping that collective consciousness to grow, and that vibration carries out to these other countries.
Yeah, like the ripple effect.
Yes, and he says he's showing me it's like people who recycle. They're helping that collective consciousness to grow. And that's why they're offering more free recycling on curbsides in a lot of states now, in a lot of cities and towns, especially here in the area that we live in.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Mm-hmm.
true. So a lot of these organizations, they take the money, but a huge chunk of it goes to the administration of it, the people in power in these places. And I mean, I was looking at different organizations and how little some of them actually give to those in need. So what do you do about that? That's greed. That's greed, and the fear of not having enough.
Erik says, and that's corruption.
Yeah.
At its best, at its finest. But he says, do your research. He says, because there are organizations where all of it, but maybe $1 will go there. He says, because he says on some of these, he's showing me some of these organizations, he says they have to have some paid staff.
Yeah, of course.
He said, so some of it has to go there. He says, but the paid staff, some of these organizations, their paid staff doesn't make very much money. Like the top guy, Erik is showing me one where they don't even make $80,000 a year.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, $80,000 isn't a lot of money. I mean, it's not chump change, but it's not like an excessive amount of money.
Yeah.
And he says, and also too, in these nonprofit organizations, their benefits aren't that great either. So, so they pay money out in benefits, and the majority of their people that work for them are part-time with no benefits, or they volunteer.
Yeah.
He says, but they don't make a large income. He says there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that do a lot for us and people abroad. And he says, we just can't keep focusing on the ones that where
That's
they
correct.
only,
Yeah.
that only get only $1 goes to the place.
Yeah.
And he says, do your research on that so you can feel good with whatever it is that you're doing.
Exactly. And of course, you can always volunteer your time and resources and stuff too if you don't have the money. All right, so let's talk about, for example, my cyber family, the channeling Erik blog members that struggle to find abundance. There's all sorts of types of abundance. We'll talk about the abundance of the material, of money. What can they do to achieve that? But having respect for money, that's a biggie. Being grateful for what you have.
Erik says to find that happiness within you, that inner peace.
Mm-hmm.
He says, really make that your priority of finding that. He says, because as you're finding that inner peace and you're getting in touch with that more, then your thoughts aren't so heavily thought on the dollar. Mm. And as you work on that, he says that just overflows. He's also telling me that your perception of money changes also when
you do that. Oh,
when you start working on that inner stuff.
Okay.
He says that he's not saying this is an easy task, and he says because when you have a lack of money, which provides us with the material things, he says it brings up so much crap for all of us, just so much crap.
Yeah.
And he says, so he says, really ask yourself, what is it that you're really wanting the money to do for you?
Yeah. Do you want it to feel good about yourself, to be labeled a success because your mom and dad or sibling, whatever, they have great jobs and you're making, or they always said, oh, if you're such and such in this career, whatever, then you're a real success, blah, 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 instead of just doing what you love. It could be very deep rooted,
Yeah, and Erik says, when you said do what you love, Erik says, sometimes we can't always start out doing everything that we love.
Oh, yeah.
Because he says, but you can learn to love aspects of where you are.
Yeah.
And he says, he's showing me so many people are like, oh, I got to go to work now, and just, or they hate it or whatever, or somebody's giving them a rough time at work. And he's not saying that isn't true. He says, but he says those are good reflector times to reflect on what's really going on inside of us. What's it really bringing up for us?
Yeah. And you got to find something that you love, even
yes,
if small, in what you do to bring the abundance that will allow you to do what you love, perhaps. So,
Yeah, Erik says, if it's, you might be the one that can make the most prettiest. He's showing me snowflakes out of paper, he says, and do that to get you into that space, whatever it is. He says he's saying there's some people, some blog members that still know how to make not paper dolls, but those characters that are stuck together.
Yeah, right.
Like they really know how to, and they keep showing me this paper, like the snowflakes. So there's a blog member or something that somebody that's going to watch this video, I feel like that's going to relate, that can do those kind of things. And he says, just have fun with that. Just get into that space with that. You don't have to be an entrepreneur doing that.
Yeah. All right. So what about other things? Is it true that if you give money respectfully by following your heart, etc., then often abundance will flow back to you?
Erik says yes, but if you're expecting it, no.
Of course, expectation is a huge barrier. What about other types of abundance, like abundance of health? How do we achieve that? There are a lot of people in the blog that do not have an abundance of health.
Erik says he says there's not one answer for that, but he says, of course, he says we didn't consciously say I want my body to be riddled with arthritis, to be arthritic,
Yeah.
or to be blind or quadriplegic, or just stuff like that, or just some other illnesses, whatever.
Yeah.
He says he says it, and then he says it's all about going within, and he says, and then also too, he says it's our eating.
Yeah.
He
Oh.
says stop buying those plates of food. And
Yeah,
he
and the
says
processed food and additive, all that.
and Eric's is, and I'm glad he's agreeing with me, because Erik says it really doesn't cost that much more to eat healthy, because even though you may not be able to buy, he's saying organic produce, there's things you can do to help pull out the pesticides,
Yeah. Oh,
to where it's not so bad. But he says, but just eating fresh vegetables. But he says we like that quickness.
I know.
And that's true. I mean,
I'm guilty of that. But yeah, and of course, one of the things that we do that makes our physical body rebel to try to send our soul the message is not being our authentic self. And so I think that's super important too.
Yes, and Erik is also saying, for those of us that eat when we're mad or hurt or angry, he says, think about what you're putting in your mouth. If you're going to feel like crap afterwards, and beat yourself up because you ate a pint of ice cream, he says, don't eat it. Because that pint of ice cream is like eating 2 gallons of ice cream then.
Yeah.
He said, so eat it with joy. Eat it, be happy, like, oh my God, I get to eat this whole thing by myself. Isn't this amazing? I get to enjoy every spoonful of this. Instead of, he says, but what we do is we eat that pint of ice cream going, I really shouldn't be eating this, and he says, and so you're eating all that guilt, all that shame, and then you beat yourself up afterwards, whether you consciously say it or not. It's the things you say, like when the way you look at yourself in the mirror.
I know. It's awful. All right, last but not least, what about an abundance of love? There's a lot of blog members, and of course people are all over the world, that just don't feel like they have enough love. How do they achieve abundance in love?
Erik says, real simple. He says, not easy, but simple. Start with yourself. Really love you. And I have to say, Erik pointed this out to me the other day, because some thoughts were coming up about stuff for me personally. And he says, you've got to love the good, the bad, and the indifferent of you, Denise. He says, that's what you have to get in touch with. You have to love all of that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's it. No more self-loathing. We're all perfect. And we all have flaws that are really important for our evolution in the human experience. So
and Erik says, they're really, they those are just things, and a lot of other people say they're flaws or whatever, but that's just what we are as human beings. And Erik says, stop taking ourselves so effing serious.
Oh, I know. Gosh.
So when we were teenagers, we pulled a girl's skirt up, or we kicked somebody in the head. Let that go. Forgive yourself for those things.
Yeah.
So you may have stole stuff from somebody's house, or or whatever the case. He says, let that stuff go. He says, he says, but we hang on to all of that.
We do. We punish ourselves. We find so many new creative ways to punish ourselves and to hate ourselves. So, okay, so that's it. So in order to get an abundance of love, love yourself. And then know that you are worthy of receiving love. And that makes it easier to give love. So there's an abundance of a two-way street. Love Avenue. All right.
Yes.
It's a two-way street. Erik, do you want to add anything else before we get Denise to tell everybody how they can get in touch with her and what she got to offer?
Erik says, just know that this isn't a easy road, but it's one that we chose, and we chose it because otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And Erik says, he says, stop taking yourself so fucking serious, because it really isn't.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, Erik, you and that.
Making her drop the F-bombs. Oh, well, I do it anyway, so. Okay, that's awesome. Denise, we can get in touch with you at www.DENISERAMON. I'll put it right here.
Very good.
I'm surprised myself. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I don't know, other than your the CE going to be coming to your house, the CE group.
I can't wait to see you and give you a hug. I miss you.
We miss you. I'm going to bring my family.
Yay! Oh, I can't wait. Oh,
yes.
That's awesome. All right, sweetie, I love you. And I love you too, Erik.
Erik's squeezing you. He says, I love you, Mom.
Bye. See you later, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.